I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about Al Jazeera. Do you think that they've upped the ante or changed the game at all? Do you think they've had any influence on Western media? And yeah, just a little bit about them and what they've done in terms of influencing media.
Well, they've been terrific, obviously. Certainly with Tunisia and Egypt, they've become must-see viewing. And I don't know how many of you, but when I'm working, I was keeping Al Jazeera on my computer live and, muting it occasionally so I could think about this or that and then just going back to see the scenes in Tahrir and find out what was going on next, to watch Hosni Mubarak give his pathetic speeches. They were remarkable. And I hope that as a result of this, they'll get more access to cable channels across the United States. They have an edge. The edge, I think, comes from the people they choose to be their experts and comment on things. It's a fairly anti-American kind of leftist edge sometimes, but they get other voices too. And their real strength is just that they have so many reporters on the ground. They had people in Suez, they had people in Alexandria, they had people all over the place. There simply was no other media organization that could compete with them during the Cairo crisis. And, let's hope that, I don't know what, I guess Qatar is for now safe from this kind of mayhem. As long as the focus is on somebody else, I think we can count on Al Jazeera to do a really, really outstanding job.
I think that's right. And we have to remember that there's this very influential Al Jazeera English as well as Al Jazeera Arabic. They're flawed. Their flaws are not difficult to see, but that doesn't take away from their achievement. They broke the mold. State-run Arab TV, or for that matter, state-run Turkish TV, when I was getting going, bored the hell out of you. And they bored the hell out of the people watching them. Can I tell you a silly story about Saudi TV? Well, I'm going to tell you a silly story about...
It's your platform, Roger.
Dear friend of mine who's really quite well known as a Saudi journalist now. I went home with him and we watched the game. And my Arabic is very poor. I'm sorry to come to the Middle East Institute and actually say this. It's poor to non-existent. So he was translating. And anyway, the way the commentator speaks, even my feeble few words of Arabic. So this guy, I won't even give him a name. I will protect his identity. He said, he was mocking it. He was having tremendous fun. He said, he scored. He scored in honor of the custodian of the two holy places. He scored. I will never forget that moment. And they loved the game. But hey, where does all that stuff come from?
And that relates to Al Jazeera how? I think we had a question here.
Hi.
Al Jazeera doesn't do that kind of thing.
So I have two questions. The first one being, I know that the other topic of this talk was what they got right. Do you have any anecdotes about what media has gotten right, or any struggling against the editor kind of business? The other question is, I know that you mentioned 10 Downing Street. You wouldn't get invited to these sort of press conferences if you asked the wrong questions. I had heard that during the Bush administration that had been the case as well. If you have any comment on that, I'd appreciate it.
You want to say what people have gotten right?
Some of the coverage of Tahrir Square was really good, was heroic. You captured the mood. Clever journalists told you what the slogans were. Shadid clearly could speak to people in Arabic and got an inside track. Some of the slogans were so clever, so imaginative, so amusing.
Remember Mubarak, please go, my arm is tired.
Well, that was one. But one, and in Arabic, the Egyptians have quite an earthy humor, and this one would have played very well. He said, Husni, you better go because I've only been married for 20 days and I want my conjugal rights. I'm sure it was put a rather more earthy way in Arabic. These people this is really amazing. I stick, though, to my charge sheet because we've got far more wrong. We in the mainstream media, it would be so easy to put the blame on the tabloid French. I mean, I'm so glad that Barbara mentioned the crisis of the media now, especially the newspapers, which is the context. It's not the theme of our talk today, but it's the context without which we can't see the bigger picture of the media. And I'm pessimistic on that score. how are we likely to achieve the more real, I was going to say the more sophisticated sense of Islam and Muslims, but the more real. These are real people leading real lives, and they want better lives. Big surprise. How can we do that at a time when the general level of understanding is poor? The media in a severely contracting mode. The World Service, where I worked for 24 years, is in the process of losing 640 staff out of some 2,400. Think about it. And yet, using your brain doesn't cost any more money than not using your brain.
Well, I should note that NPR, I think, has done an excellent job bringing forward these voices that we so rarely get to hear, voices of young Egyptians, 20s, 30s, educated, plugged into new media, voices we've never heard before. And it's been very exciting to see how wise and open and sort of liberal they are. And speaking of cutbacks, NPR is potentially going to face a major cutback, which will remove from our realm one of the few sources of international news. So that's very upsetting.
You had a question about the Iraq and the Bush administration, and did they play favorites? Yes, of course they did. Judy Miller had amazing access to members of the vice president's staff in particular, who fed her little tidbits that turned out to be bogus, then helped pave the way into war. I think afterwards I was feeling rather good that I didn't have such close ties with because I wasn't being fed this kind of garbage. And the temptation, of course, if you're being told this by Scooter Libby, my God, is that, well, it must be true. It comes from Scooter Libby, right? How do you dare go against that sort of information? Very hard not to be used in those kinds of circumstances. I will say, just in defense, by and large, everybody dropped the ball on Iraq, weapons of mass destruction, because journalists didn't have any independent way of knowing what was going on there. We had stuff coming from CIA, from British intelligence that was difficult, French, others that was difficult for journalists to counter. But there was some pushback on the whole issue of whether Iraq would be ripe for democracy. And I remember in particular a piece I did in November of 2002, a long piece that USA Today did actually let me publish, admittedly on page 11A, but on how Iraq was the last place on the planet where you were going to bring democracy easily. And that, again, is the benefit of, I had been to Iraq. I'd been there in the 80s. I knew Iraq. And if you don't have that kind of experience, you can't even imagine doing that kind of story. I remember the Egyptians always used to say that the Iraqis had heavy blood, that they liked to kill each other, and contrast that with their own behavior. So the first time I was allowed to do a front page story for USA Today about how hard Iraq might be was on the day the U.S. troops went in. Then I was allowed to do, oh my God, what have we gotten ourselves into kind of story, So it was tough. It was tough.
You